Hey everyone, in this lesson we are going to have an introductory look at GitHub and why you would use it as a Unity developer. So first of all, there are two main aspects or systems that we need to cover. The first one is going to be Git and the second one is going to be GitHub. Okay, these are two different things, but at the same time they're kind of the same in many ways. So let's first of all go over what is Git. Well, Git basically is an open source version control system that tracks changes in files. Okay, so this basically allows you to push changes that you have made to your Unity project to basically this repository, and then you can also pull changes if you are, for example, an artist and you want to work on the project. You can push your changes. You might have other artists working on it. You might have other developers writing code. It's basically a great way to collaborate on a single Unity project without having to, drag the files over to Google Drive and download them or put them on a USB stick. You can use Git, which is a great way of managing all of the changes and making sure that they merge correctly together. Now, what is GitHub? Well, GitHub is a web-based Git repository, okay? It is pretty much a website or a cloud service that utilizes Git, but the great thing about GitHub is this means that we do not need to install Git or any other software onto our computer, and we can access our files from anywhere with an internet connection. Okay, GitHub is very popular. Generally, when you're making games, and you want some sort of version control, you'll generally use some form of Git, and in many cases, you'll be using GitHub, okay? And GitHub, like I said, it just makes it a lot easier to share your files around and have different collaborators contribute to the project. Now, how does it all work? Well, there are 5 main aspects that we are going to cover. They are repository, collaborator, commit, push, and pull. Now, let's look at each of these and see what they are and how they actually help build up this version control system. So, first one is repository. Now, this is basically where we store our Unity project, the script, the textures, the scenes, materials, etc. Okay, all of our folders. Now, with Unity, we have our folder for our project, and inside of that, all of our files. Now, if, for example, we wanted to have someone else contribute to that project, we could, put it on a USB stick or put it on Google Drive and hand it over that way. But a repository in GitHub terms is basically like a file explorer in the cloud that we can then add files to, modify those files, delete files, etc. Now, a collaborator, these are the people who are contributing to the repository or the repo, okay? So if you have a small team of 3 people, each of those would be collaborators, and they would all be able to contribute and access the repo, okay? The next thing we need to look at is commit. Now, whenever we have made changes to the project, let's just say we have modified a script, we've changed the scene around a little bit, those changes are going to be applied to our local project, so the project we have stored on our computer, and then all of those changes are going to basically be recognized by Git, and it will then keep track of those. And then when we want to apply those changes to the repo, we will do something what is known as pushing the changes, okay? So this basically gets our commit, which is basically a log of all of the changes that have been made to files, all of the files that have been added, all the files that have been deleted, and it will then apply those changes to the main repo in the cloud. So, and then if someone else comes along, they want to see what changes we've made, they might want to modify them a little bit themselves, then they can do what is known as a pull request, which is basically where they are getting the repo from the cloud, they are pulling it, and they are basically applying it to their local project, okay? So, for example, like I said before, with the script changes, let's just say you have 2 script writers, 2 programmers. One of them makes a change, they push that change to the repo. Someone else then wants to, maybe modify that script a bit as well. Well, what they can do is they can pull that change, that file, those changes to that file will be applied on their local machine. They can then apply those changes, commit those changes, push them to the repo, and then you can sort of see how everyone is contributing, pushing and pulling in a workflow similar to this. So you have your local project, whenever you make changes, that gets applied to the commit, and then when we push that commit, those changes get applied to the main GitHub repo. And then on a new local machine, if we are just joining the project or if we want to be updated to the current version, we can then pull those changes from GitHub. Okay, so this is the basic system and how it works. Now, in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can start creating a brand new repo on GitHub. Hey everyone, in this lesson, we are going to be creating a new account on GitHub and setting everything up to create a new repo that we can then use for our Unity project. So to begin, I am going to go to github.com right here, and this is the website. Now to sign up, we're simply going to go to the top right corner of the screen and select the sign up button right here. This is going to bring us over to the sign up page where basically we are then going to follow through with these instructions in order to set up our account. Okay, and once you have successfully signed up, you should then be taken to the sign in page where you simply enter in your username or email and password and click sign in. And then finally, you should find yourself here on the GitHub dashboard. Now, in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can create a brand new repository that is centered around a Unity project. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how to create a new GitHub repository for a Unity project. So here I am on my GitHub dashboard, and what I'm going to do is simply click on the green Create Repository button here on the left-hand side. There's also one down here, and there's also one if you click on your top right corner here on your name, you can go down to your repositories and create one there. But we're just going to click on the green button right here, and that is going to bring us over to the Create a New Repository window. Now, here, what we want to do is, first of all, give our repository a name. This has to be a unique name for your account. I'm just going to call this one my first Unity project. And there we go. You can give it a description if you wish. So if you're working with multiple different collaborators, or if this is going to be a public repo, then I recommend that. But if it's just going to be a private repository that you are using to back up your projects, then it's not necessary. Now, the second option down here is a fairly important one. You have to decide whether or not you want your repo to be public or private. Public means that anybody is going to have access to your repo, not just to view it, but to download the files as well. So if you're working on a game that is something, you might be working with a team or a group of people, I would recommend switching over to private. The only time I would recommend having this as public is if you are creating a resource or tools that you want people to be able to use, or if you're creating some open source software that you want to be used by the public, okay? Otherwise, if it's a personal project or a project you're working on in a team, I'd recommend switching it over to private. You can also then choose to add a README file, which is basically just a text document that can contain information about your project. Now, this is going to be useful if it is public, but if it's a private project, then it's not that necessary. Now, down here is probably the most important thing that we set up specifically for a Unity project, and that is the git ignore file. Now, what a git ignore file is it basically lists out all of the different directories, subdirectories, and file extensions that it is not going to include when changes are committed. Now, why do we want this? Well, with Unity, there is a lot of fluff, I guess you could say, in its file system. For example, the entire library folder is generally specific to your computer and all of the preferences and settings you have set up there, and it can contain quite a large amount of files and really increase the size of your project. Because with this, we only want to be sending over and committing the files specifically that we have changed. So if we are modifying, for example, a player controller script, and that is all we do, then that is the only thing we want to be pushing to the repo, okay? We don't want to be pushing all of our cached files, all of our metadata files. That is just pointless information we are sending to the repo and increasing the file size, okay? So what a git ignore does is it is going to basically look at all of the files we are committing, and it is going to filter out all of the ones that are included in the git ignore. Now, you may be thinking, okay, well, I don't really know exactly all the different subdirectories and file extensions that I got to leave out when it comes to Unity, and that doesn't matter because GitHub has a built-in gitignore for many different pieces of software. You can see here. So I'm simply going to search for Unity and select it there. And there we go. Now, next up is a license. Now, again, if this is a private project, it's not that necessary, but if it is a public project and you want to specify explicitly if it is open source, then you could do that there. But I'm simply going to click Create Repository, and that is going to set things up. And here we are. So this here is our repo. You can see we have a few areas of interest. The first one is going to be this section here where we have our gitignore file. So this little window here is basically going to be our file explorer. Okay, this is going to contain all of our files and folders that we can navigate through as if it was a file explorer on our desktop. And then down here is basically a preview of the README file. So if we had a README file, this is where all the information would be listed out. Maybe if it was a public project, you'd be introducing people to the project and how to utilize it. And let's actually have a look at the gitignore file just to see what it contains, because right now this is the only thing in our repo. So I'm going to click it, and this is what we are going to see right here. So this here is basically listing out all the different directories and file types that we are going to exclude in the commit. You can see here the library folder, the temp file, the obj, the build, the builds, logs, etc. All of these folders which are specific to caching information and user preferences are not going to be included with the commits because other people might have different preferences set up. They might have their own library folder that, would have to be regenerated if we are modifying it so much. And generally, we are leaving out everything that is user specific, okay, like user settings, because if you have a layout of your editor and someone then pulls your changes, they don't want their editor all of a sudden mixed up and confusing, okay? So that is what the gitignore here also does, as well as a bunch of file types that it is leaving, as you can see here. And you can also go ahead and add in your own if you wish. Now to do this, we can simply go to the top right corner and click on this little pen icon, which will edit the file. We can modify them here, and then we can actually apply those changes by committing them here, okay? But I'm not going to do any of that because we aren't actually going to be modifying our project here inside of GitHub. Now, if I just click on my first Unity project, that'll bring us back to our main screen here. And the number one question you're probably thinking is, okay, we've set this up, now how do I actually add my existing Unity project to this, or how do I create a new Unity project to utilize this? And then how do I apply those changes? How do I pull those changes? Because right now we are just on a website here. Now we can click on the green code button and download that as a zip, but again, that's only a bit of the issue solved. And how is this any different than a Google Drive or a USB stick, for example? Well, in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at downloading a piece of software called GitHub Desktop, which is basically an application that interfaces with the GitHub website here. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then. Hey everyone, in this lesson, we are going to be looking at installing GitHub Desktop. Now, what this is basically a piece of software that is going to be the interface between our local project on our computer and our GitHub repository here on the GitHub website. So basically what GitHub Desktop does is it is going to basically create the repo on our local device on our computer, and then whenever we make any changes to those files and whenever we add any more files, it is going to be able to recognize those. We can then commit those files, have a little message, and then push those changes to the repo. Likewise, if changes have been made to the repo, we can then pull those changes and have them be applied to our local project, okay? And this basically is an alternative to the typical way of utilizing Git, which is by using a command prompt, which as a beginner user, it is fairly overwhelming. So this nice visual layout and visual way of interacting with your files and your different branches of your repo is a much nicer experience. So what we're going to do is, again, go to the GitHub desktop webpage, which is going to be at /apps/desktop. Okay, and we are then going to click on the download now button. We can then choose our operating system, so I'm going to click download for Windows, and that will begin the process. Okay, so once that is done, we can then open up the setup.exe file. Okay, and once you have gone through the installation process, you should then be here inside of your GitHub desktop software. Now, I've already got some repos assigned to it, but we'll go through the process of actually connecting our account right now. So what I'm going to do is go up to where we have File, and then go down to Options, and then in Options here, we are going to go to Accounts, and then click on Sign into GitHub.com. We'll click Continue with Browser. And here it is going to take us to a sign-in page where we basically then want to select the account we want to use. So I'll click Continue on my new account here and then click Authorize Desktop. And there we go. So now we can click Open GitHub Desktop. That will bring us back and we should then be connected. Now to make sure, we can go back to the options and see in fact that we are connected here with our GitHub account. Now we can do what is known as cloning a repo, which basically means we are going to get the repository for our repo that we just created and then clone that, which basically means download it and put it on our local machine here. So whenever we make changes to those specific files at that directory, those changes can then be committed. So to do this, we are going to go up to the top left corner here where we have our repository button. And we are then going to go over to the Add dropdown and select Clone Repository. Now inside of here, you should be able to click on github.com and see all of the repositories that are linked to your account. Now here we have that My First Unity Project repo, which we are going to select. And then we can choose a local path. This is where the files are going to be stored on our computer. If you want, I'd recommend creating a GitHub subdirectory to store all of your GitHub projects, or if you want them on a different drive, make sure to switch that over right now. So once it is done, we can simply click on Clone, and there we go. So now here we are inside of our repo. Now, to make sure that everything has been set up correctly, what I'm going to do is actually go over to that folder where we have everything set up right here. So as you can see, I'm in my GitHub subdirectory, then the My First Unity Project folder. And in here, if you remember, the only file we have in our repo at the moment is that .gitignore. Okay, and if we open that up, that's going to be the exact same file as before that we saw inside of GitHub. So now any files that we add or modify inside of this My First Unity Project folder, all of those files will be tracked, their changes will be recognized, and when a change has been made, it will basically appear here, and then we can commit and then push those changes. So in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can actually link a Unity project to the repo and start submitting those changes. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then. Alright, so let's have a look at how we can basically apply or add our existing or a new Unity project to our repo. So if you have an existing Unity project, simply open that up here on screen inside of your file explorer. Now we want to be inside of the project file. You can see here, I'm inside of the project folder where we have our assets, library, logs, etc., all of that. Now, if you want to use a new Unity project, then simply just open up the Unity Hub and create a new project, and then navigate over to those project files. Now, the next step is going to be opening up your local cloned repo folder. So this is basically where our repo is being stored on our computer. You can see here, all we've got is the gitignore file. And then what we're going to do is simply select all of our files and folders relating to our Unity project. Now, do make sure that these are the folders inside of your main project folder, okay? Because this, My First Unity Project here on the left-hand side, this is going to act as our project folder now. So we simply then want to just copy these over like so. And there we go. So now we have our Unity project copied over to our GitHub cloned repo folder. You can still see we have the .gitignore inside of our project files here. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to go back to GitHub Desktop, and you're going to notice something has changed. And that is basically we now have a large list of files appearing here on the left-hand side. And these are all the files that the GitHub desktop has noticed that have been changed, added, or deleted. Okay, you can see here we have a little green icon, which basically means this is a new file that has been added. We can see the file name and the directory on the left-hand side. And if we click on these files, you can actually see all of the data that the file contains. So if we go down here to where we perhaps have our input manager asset, you can see this is basically going to be that input manager asset that we would have in Unity. Now, we're going to get into a bit more detail about how working with scripts and all of that works with GitHub, as we can then see specifically what lines of code have been changed. But you can see here, everything in green is essentially what has been added or what is new to the file, which is pretty much everything for every file. And you'll also notice that we are not having our library folders or our OBJ folders here, and that is because that gitignore is filtering out everything that we do not need, or that we do not want to be added to our repo. So only the folders and files that are important will be included. So what we then want to do is commit these changes. So to do this, we're going to go down to the bottom left corner where we can enter in a little summary for what this is. So basically, when you're doing commits, it's a great idea to actually include information about what changes you are making, what files you have added, what things you are doing. Now, since this is our first commit where we are basically just adding our project, I am just going to say added project to repo, like so. Now, if you have any further information, you can add that to the description down here, but I'm simply going to click on the commit to main button at the bottom. Now, those changes have been committed, but if we go up to our GitHub repo here and refresh, you'll notice that, well, nothing has changed. And that is because even though we have committed the changes, we have not pushed them to the repo, okay? They have only been committed on our computer. To push them, we want to go to the top of our screen here, and you'll see there is a push origin button with a little 1, meaning there is one commit to push. We are going to click on that, and that is going to begin the process of uploading those files to the repo. Now, if we go back to the repo and refresh, what you'll notice is that our project has all of a sudden appeared here on the GitHub servers. So we basically just have our Unity project listed out here. We can go through all of the different folders, look at all these different files here as we could. So now the next step is going to be looking at what happens when we make some changes to the Unity project. What happens when we add a file? What happens when we create a new script, add a new material, modify a material, for example. We can then look at applying those changes and also perhaps even choosing not to commit certain files. So that is what we are going to be looking at in the next lesson. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at making changes inside of our project and then seeing those changes appear inside of GitHub Desktop, and we'll then go over exactly what those changes show, if we want to choose to leave something out of a commit for some reason, as well as some other things as well. So here we are inside of our project, and I'm going to start by just creating, let's just say, a script. So we can create a new C# script here. We'll just call this one player, for example. We might then want to add in a cube to our player scene right here. And then let's just simply attach this script and provide some basic movement code. Okay, so we'll open up this script inside of Visual Studio and just write something simple. Okay, and there we go. So just some basic movement code. Now we can hop back inside the editor, apply a speed to the player here, press play, and just make sure it works. And as you can see, there we go. So now what we can do is save this, and if we go back to GitHub Desktop, what you'll notice is that on the left-hand side, we have a few things appearing here, okay? So these are the files that have been changed, okay? So you can see we have a brand new player .cs script right here. And if I select it, you'll see we have our code that we just wrote, and every line is green, meaning every line here is new. You can see by it having the plus icon on the left-hand side. Also, the player changed file here has a green plus, meaning it is new, whereas the sample scene down here, since we already included the scene inside of the project, that is not new. Rather, if we hover over, you'll see it is modified, okay? Now, let's just go ahead and, just for an example case, let's go ahead back to the project and delete a file. So this README that comes with the URP template, we can simply delete that. And then if we go into GitHub Desktop, you'll see we have a new file here. We have the readme.asset file, and if we click on it, you'll see everything is red, and that means it is basically removed. And if we hover over the red icon here, you can see it is deleted. So Git will keep track of files you have added, files you have modified, and files that also have been removed. Because if you, for example, want to delete something off the repo, that file also needs to be deleted on everyone else's computer, okay? Otherwise, there might be errors occurring otherwise. So these are all the changes that we have made. So now what we can do is simply make a commit on this. So down here, we can go perhaps added player script. We can then commit that to the main thread and then push. And there we go. Now, if you also want to see a history of all the commits we have done, you can go to the top left corner, and where we have changes, we can switch over to history. And here we can actually have an in-depth look at all the different commits and pushes that have been occurred by all the different collaborators. So if we select the first one here, this is basically where we created the repo and added the git ignore file. The second one was when we added our Unity project. And the third one is the one we just done, which is where we added the new player script. And we can even see all of the changes that have been made. So if there is an issue and you want to, backtrack to see what it was exactly, you can do that right here. Now let's look at what happens if we modify our player script and see what that looks like. So I'm just going to open up our player script here. Let's perhaps delete the normalized here at the end. And we might also add in a debug call here. So debug log moving, for example, okay, just to show that we are adding and modifying the code. So now, if we go back to Unity, everything compiles, and if we open up our GitHub desktop here, you can see we have one change detected, which is that player script, and this is what it looks like. So what you'll notice is that we have one line removed, and that is basically the line that we modified. And instead, it will then show us the line it has added, okay? So basically, it's not replacing a bit of the text, rather it will replace an entire line with a new one with the modification in place, okay? And then, of course, we have the additional lines down here for the debug log message. Now, let's just say we have written this, we go through our commit messages here, or our files that have been changed, and we go, okay, before I commit this, I kind of want to revert this change. I don't want this change to have happened. How can we basically revert that? So what we can do is right-click on the change we have made in the left side panel and simply click on Discard Changes. And what this is going to do is it's going to have a pop-up appear. And basically, when we click Discard Changes, that is going to revert all the changes that have been made to that file. So if we open up our script now, you'll notice that the debug log message is no longer here, and the input line has been changed to have the normalized added back. Okay, so basically, if you're going through, you realize that you accidentally changed something that you shouldn't have, maybe you're modifying a file that you know somebody else is working on, then you can simply revert the commit change that way, rather than having to go through and change line by line to how it was before, as even if you do that, there may still be some metadata that gets transferred over, and it can cause issues if two people are working on the same file at once, they combine, and they conflict in some way. Although, there are ways to merge script files, so if two people are working on the same script file at the same time, there are ways to merge them together, although it can be a bit messy, but we will be looking at those in the future as well. So, that is a look at how we can basically make changes inside of Unity, and also how we can revert those changes.